This weekend at UFC 313, Alex Pereira is taking on Magomed Ankalaev, and a lot of MMA fans think that Magomed is Alex Pereira's toughest matchup at light heavyweight. So I wanted to go through and talk about the top 3 toughest matchups for every single current UFC champion. Let me know your thoughts down below. If you guys agree, disagree, let me hear it. But let's just dive right into it here, and we're going to start off at heavyweight with Jon Jones. I know we have Tom Aspinall as the interim, but as of right now, Jon Jones does hold that title. And obviously, number one here, his toughest challenge, it's going to be Tom Aspinall. He has 8 wins in the UFC, 8 finishes, 7 of them in the first round. He obviously just has insane nuclear power, could put Jon Jones light out at really any point in that matchup, and has also shown some competent grappling. He obviously hasn't faced someone to the level of Jon Jones in that department, but we saw in the Volkov fight, he could wrestle offensively, has some creativity with his submission game. Tom Aspinall's obviously the toughest test, so he is at number 1. Then at number 2, kind of a curveball. It's not someone who's actually at heavyweight. I have Magomed Ankalaev, and this just comes down to Jon Jones still being pretty untested in terms of his current form, right? When he was wrapping up his career at 205, he had some very questionable performances against guys like Thiago Santos, Dominic Reyes, very, very close fights. Then, he takes a few years off, he moves up to heavyweight, and he picks up wins against Cyril Gane, who obviously just has a clear grappling hole. And then Stipe Miocic, who is clearly well past his prime, had been out for years after getting flatlined by Francis Ngannou. So this is kind of just a matchup against someone who's well-rounded, a technical, safe striker, but is also shown to have competent wrestling and grappling. Don't think he's been taken down in his last 12 fights, or it's only happened one singular time. So this is kind of just a test of what is Jon Jones' current form? If Jones truly is a top-tier heavyweight, then he should beat Magomed Ankalaev, but I just think Magomed's a tough matchup. And if Jon Jones can't get the grappling going, I think on the feet, Magomed could have, some potential success. And then my third toughest matchup is going to be Curtis Blaydes. This is obviously within the UFC. Francis Ngannou would clearly be here. But for Curtis Blaydes, in his career, he has just really struggled with power punchers. Those were his 5 losses, right? 2 to Francis Ngannou, 1 to Sergey Pavlovich, 1 to Tom Aspinall, and then 1 to Derek Lewis. Jon Jones does not have that one-punch KO power, which has been Curtis Blaydes' kryptonite here. He is the most proven heavyweight wrestler outside of Jon Jones. And so if Curtis Blaydes can nullify the grappling of Jon Jones, I think it would be interesting to see how he looks up at heavyweight if they're just going strike for strike, especially against someone like Curtis Blaydes, who definitely would be holding the power advantage. So those are the toughest matchup for Jon Jones. Now the guy who is fighting this weekend, Alex Pereira, even though some people think Magomed's the toughest matchup, I actually think Khamzat Chimaev coming up from middleweight would be his toughest test. And I know he's probably going to be the smaller, lighter guy, someone who used to fight at welterweight, now at middleweight. I just think the clear kryptonite for Alex Pereira is going to be just a dominant grappler. And even a weight class up, I just think Khamzat has that style where he is going to go and shoot right out of the gate. He is going to put on that relentless wrestling pace. And I just don't think Pereira has the grappling to survive for a round. If he gets into the second round, then Khamzat's probably going to be, fading a little bit. The cardio's not going to hold up. And then I think Pereira could definitely nuke him. I just don't really know if Alex Pereira is surviving that first 5 minutes. It's tough to do against Khamzat Chimaev. And I just don't think Alex Pereira has been grappling long enough to survive that. So I think Khamzat's the toughest test, even though he's not even in the weight class. The number 2, I have Magomed Ankalaev. I think what's so interesting about this Magomed matchup is I feel like a lot of people are overrating his wrestling and grappling, but I think a lot of people are equally underrating his striking. He certainly has the ability to wrestle, but he is not some sort of high-volume wrestler who's going to take a million shots. The dude averages under 1 takedown per 15 minutes, but he is very, very good on the feet, and he's very patient. He's very safe. He doesn't leave himself open to get clipped like some of the other guys that Alex Pereira has fought. So I think Magomed has the ability to mix things up. He's going to be tough to put away, and also could potentially bank some rounds by getting some control time, landing some ground and pound, where on the feet might be low volume because Pereira is going to be worried about that takedown threat. And then my number 3, this is probably going to be the hottest take in this entire video. I have Bo Nickal here. Now, this is not some take that Bo Nickal is the current best middleweight in the world or anything. It's purely a stylistic matchup. Bo Nickal is completely unproven in MMA. He doesn't really have a big time win at 185. But when you look at the landscape at 205, there are pretty much like zero competent grapplers in that weight class. And in a striking battle, I feel like Pereira is going to win the vast majority of those matchups against pretty much everyone in the top 15. When you look at Bo Nickel, if he went out there and was just like, I'm going to sprint at Alex Pereira and I'm just going to turn this into a wrestling match, sure, he could get clipped, but if he can close the distance and get into the clinch, I think he could definitely have some success. It really just comes down to the lack of grapplers up at 205, where now I have to like go down to middleweight and just pick out like one of the top wrestlers, but that's why I have Bo in my top 3. Now looking at middleweight here, we have Dricus du Plessis. I think this is interesting because, all 3 guys kind of approaching title shots that I have here. My number 1, just like it was for Alex Pereira, it is Khamzat Chimaev. He kind of just seems like a nightmare matchup for every middleweight, especially in that round 1. The dude just absolutely ran through Robert Whittaker. Now, Dricus du Plessis could weather the storm, survive the first round, and then kind of pull away and find a finish or, win a clear decision. I just am not going to bank on him surviving that first round. It's just going to be so tough to do. So I think Khamzat is certainly the toughest test for a guy like DDP with his ability to just go in there and like maul you and get you out of there in the first round. Then at number 2, I have Caio Borralho, just a really, really impressive MMA fighter. He's 7-0 in the UFC, has great control grappling, showcased the striking in some recent fights against Paul Craig, also looked really good against Jared Cannonier, had that 5-round cardio. I just think it's going to be tough to put Caio away, and he's always going to be live in a fight. And then number 3, also someone who's just very well-rounded, Nasruddin Imavov. We've kind of seen DDP like take on this like older wave of middleweights with Izzy, Whittaker, the 2 Strickland fights. This is like the young wave. These guys are really like pushing up the rankings, going to be getting themselves into title contention. Imavov's well-rounded, clean striking, coming off that KO win over Israel Adesanya. Overall, just 3 matchups that I would love to see in the future with the current champ, Dricus du Plessis. Now moving down to welterweight, we have Belal Muhammad. And I think this is interesting because he has not defended the title, so there are a lot of potential names out there that could be threats to take that belt. My number 1 is actually not going to be someone in the welterweight weight class. It is going to be Islam Makhachev. I think at this point, Islam probably beats everyone at 155. I think Ilya certainly has a chance. I think he is definitely a threat to beat Islam, but he's going to be the betting favorite against anyone at 155. I think he's also the betting favorite against every single fighter at 170. I think when you look at his skill set versus Belal's, he's probably better everywhere, maybe with the exception of cardio. Not that Islam is bad cardio, but Belal, that's probably like his strong suit at this point. I also think the fact that Islam Makhachev seems somewhat willing to fight Belal, whereas Belal's kind of like, nah, we trained together, like he's a brother, I don't really want to fight him. It kind of tells me that Islam's probably had a lot of success, and Belal knows how that potential matchup would go. At number 2, I have Shavkat Rakhmonov, and I think some people have kind of, jumped off the hype train. They're kind of lower on him after his fight against Ian Gary. He certainly looked human, had kind of been like the Terminator before that, had finished every single one of his fights before that Ian Gary decision. But I still think he is a very, very tough matchup, and styles make fights, and a Belal matchup, I think, is a little bit easier stylistically compared to a guy like Ian Gary, where Ian Gary was not very tested. We didn't know what the wrestling defense was going to look like. It really held up against a guy like Shavkat, who had a lot of grappling success in the UFC. And then Gary's going to keep a ton of range. He's going to be safe on the feet. He's a clean striker. It's just a completely different skill set when you're dealing with Belal Muhammad. Like, is Belal going to hold Shavkat down? That would surprise me. And I just don't see Shavkat getting outclassed on the feet. I think he'd be able to keep the range. And it's just something that, like, other guys haven't been able to do against Belal that I think Shavkat could potentially do. And then number 3, I was between a few different guys here. I ended up going with the guy that's currently booked to fight Belal, Jack Della Maddalena. I think there are certainly arguments for a guy like Ian Gary. Also someone like Joaquin Buckley, I think could be interesting matchups against Belal Muhammad. But I went with JDM. Obviously, the takedown defense is concerning. We saw some of that in the Basil Hafez fight. Also, his most recent win against Gilbert Burns. But I think JDM's style, the pressure boxing, he's relentless. He's going to put a pace out there. He's not someone that's going to wilt under the pressure of Belal. And as long as they are on the feet, as long as JDM's not getting clinched or controlled, JDM is going to have infinitely more finishing upside. The dude is like one of the cleanest boxers in the UFC. He's so fun to watch, hits hard, works the body. So I think that this JDM Belal fight is going to be very competitive, and I'm certainly excited to see that one as a fan. Now, we've arrived at lightweight, where we have Islam Makhachev, And I think his number one threat is 100% Ilia Topuria, even though he's coming up from 145, going to be the smaller man. We saw that Islam's toughest title fight was against Volkanovski coming up, and the major difference between that fight and this one is the fact that Ilia Topuria truly has fight-ending power. If he catches Islam clean, he is going to go to sleep, and that's just not a threat that was there when he was taking on Volkanovski. There are certainly things that are worrisome for a guy like Ilia. I think the fact that Islam is a southpaw is not great for Ilia's style, but I just think Ilia is really, really good. I think he's going to go down as an all-time great if he's not already there, and so he would be the toughest test in my opinion. Then at number 2, I have Charles Oliveira. Now, we saw the first fight wasn't super competitive. I still think Charles has a tough fight. I think in the first matchup, he just respected Islam too much, was a little too patient, too passive, and kind of just let Islam go to work. I think an aggressive Charles Oliveira, someone who's just going to push forward, push his pace on them, is a dangerous fight for anyone and can finish any fighter in this weight class. Now, I'm not saying if he goes out there, fight super aggressive, that he's going to win more often than he loses. He's still going to lose the majority of those matchups, but I think he would give himself a better chance. And to beat Islam in a, 5-round fight by decision is tough. Oliveira is someone who does have that finishing upside. And then number 3, I have Arman Tsarukyan. I think Arman is just really, really good, but I also think kind of what I just said, tough to see him finding a finish against Islam, and then winning 3 out of 5 rounds does seem like an uphill battle. I think Ilia is the clear top threat. I think Charles has a shot to finish him. Outside of those two, not super confident that anyone can take down Islam Makhachev at this point. Then featherweight, we do not currently have a champion. We have the vacant belt, Volk taking on Diego Lopez. So, skipping past them. And then at bantamweight, we have Merab Dvalishvili. And I think the number one threat, his toughest matchup, is the guy he just fought, Umar Nurmagomedov. It was a 48-47. It was a very impressive win from Merab. But I feel like the fact that Merab was an underdog, the fact that he closed well, people seem to forget, this was a very close and competitive fight. I mean, Umar taking the first 2 rounds is something you don't really see guys do against Merab. And keep in mind, Umar Nurmagomedov has not been fighting a ton of high-level competition. He had one really strong win against Corey Sandhagen before getting that matchup. He's 29 years old. He should continue to get better. Merab is 34, and the lighter weight classes could be falling off at some point. I think Umar was and still is the toughest matchup, even though Merab did have a great performance and picked up the win. Then at number 2, I have Davison Figueiredo. And I think with Merab, it is going to be very, very tough to beat him over 5 rounds. So I opted to pick someone who has that finishing upside early in fights. Figgy hits like a tank, super powerful, could completely, put Merab out early in the fight. And I think he also has a good submission game. He's got a nasty guillotine, submitted Alex Perez and Tim Elliott with that, so could potentially mitigate some of the wrestling of a guy like Merab. I don't think he has the cardio to hang with Merab for 5 rounds, but I don't really know if anyone does, right? Guys who have good cardio, Umar, Piotr Yan, they look exhausted after 5 rounds with Merab, so I'm not really trying to bank on someone winning a decision. For Figgy, he has the opportunity to end it early on. And then at number 3, I went with Piotr Yan. Now, some people might disagree because the first fight was so uncompetitive. Merab shot 50 takedown attempts in that fight. He landed 11, racked up 11 minutes of control time. This kind of just comes down to the fact that I think Piotr Yan is too good to let that happen to him again. I think he has to come into the rematch, having ways to punish Merab for shooting that many times. He's looked good against Song Yadong. He looked good against Davison Figueiredo. I just think Piotr Yan is really, really good. He's going to be a tough matchup for anyone at bantamweight, and I do think he's going to make a better account of himself in the rematch, and I do hope he gets the next title fight. If they're not going to go Merab Pantoja, I think Piotr Yan is the more deserving guy, especially over Sean O'Malley, who has not picked up a win since losing that belt. And then the final weight class here, men's flyweight, we have Alexandre Pantoja, and I think his toughest test is Brandon Moreno. They fought for the title. That's who Pantoja took the title off of. It was a split decision, a super, super close fight. I think Moreno looked great in the Amir Albazi fight, especially in terms of mitigating the grappling, not getting controlled. I just think Moreno and Pantoja fight, it's always going to be competitive. There's kind of this weird triangle at flyweight where you had Davison Figueiredo, who was beating everyone, has a win over Pantoja. Moreno was kind of just his nightmare matchup. And then Moreno gets the belt. Pantoja seems to be like his nightmare matchup. And then if Figgy was still at 125, I think he probably would be considered the nightmare matchup for Pantoja. So even though Moreno has not had success, I still think he certainly has the opportunity to win a fight. And if I was like, one dude's beating him, he would be my pick. Number 2, I have Steve Urseg. Now, he's coming off the KO loss to Kai Kara-France. Not really in the title picture. I guess with the win against Moreno, he certainly could get right back in there. But I just think he made a great account of himself in their title fight. Someone who didn't have a ton of high-level experience. That was a 2-2 fight going into the 4th round. Pantoja ends up sealing the 5th with 3 minutes of control time. But I think he came in, had a smart game plan, whether that's him or his team. I think it could bode well for a potential rematch. He used the counter elbows when Pantoja was blitzing in, which is something that Davison Figueiredo did. So I love to see that. I just think he fought well in the first fight. He's young, should still be improving. Don't think it's crazy to see him have some success in a potential rematch. And then number 3, I think this could have gone to a few different guys. I went with Manel Kape. These guys actually fought back in 2021. And if you watch that fight, it's crazy how different both these guys are, 4 years from then. Pantoja only shot 1 takedown in that fight. That is not a style he's going to at this point. And then Manel Kape was just super passive. Like we see him in some of his recent fights. He's ultra aggressive, having these fun performances. That was not the same guy that we saw when he was making his UFC debut. I think Kape is a capable defensive grappler and obviously dangerous if you can keep it on the feet. Has had great back-to-back showings. The fouling, the nut shots, the eye pokes have certainly been a factor, but even without those, he has still looked good. I think the concern here for Manel Kape is that he looks great in matchups where he's comfortable on the feet and his opponent isn't posing a grappling threat. But you look at the Muhammad Mokaev fight, you kind of get into like this slow-paced, boring fight where he seems to be a little bit gun-shy, can still be controlled a little bit. And I feel like Pantoja is kind of just a better version of Muhammad Mokaev. So that's my concern, but Kape could still be evolving. Obviously, if he's on the feet, he is going to be a threat to put you away. So that is going to wrap it up for my toughest matchups for all the men's champions. Let me know your thoughts down below. If you agree, disagree, let me hear it. But thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.